You're live. Defer to you.
All right, welcome to House Education. This is a joint hearing of House and Senate Education Committees. And I'm going to turn the introductions over to Representative Brady. This is kind of her bailiwick, and take it away.
We are going to have some testimony this afternoon. We'll ask witnesses to introduce themselves, but about a range of issues in our teacher workforce, teacher pipeline. We know this has been identified for many years as a challenge in this state. And we have a shortage in many areas, and we have an exceptionally high number of teachers on provisional licenses. So we're going to get a couple different pieces of information here about some of the solutions and the work happening around the state to address this from some different angles. Some of it will be a bit of a sort of check back on legislation that we passed 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago. They all start to blur together 2 years ago as part of a larger workforce bill, and the teacher workforce piece was swept into that commerce bill 2 years ago. And some of it is more organic work that's happening in the field and some innovative ways to address some of it. And several witnesses here, you two and Colin Robinson will be here in a bit, that have a real clear sense, I think, of what some of the biggest challenges in the field are and what some of our workforce kind of outlook might be. So if you would introduce yourself, and then thank you for
Great. So I'm Andrew Crowden. I'm with the Agency of Education. I'm the Assistant Director of the Equality Division. So that means I primarily oversee the licensing and the pre-service or teacher preparation teams.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm John Castle. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Rural Education Collaborative. We work with 8 supervisory unions and supervisory districts in the Northeast Kingdom primarily, a little bit of Orange County and a few other, Washington County. I think we have 1 school and that kind of thing. But 50 schools total, 8 different SUs and SDs. I'm a former superintendent of schools at North Country Supervisory Union and Rutland Northeast.
Great. Yeah, so I can get us started. So a couple of these things, the House folks saw from me last year. So a little bit of an update, and then getting some really specific things on how the funds are actually being used. So really exciting projects going on this year. So just to start with the grounding, I had it in the slides that first is a graph of our provisional licenses and emergency licenses. I combined them both in there. So you can see it's pretty stark. In 2017, it was about 430 combined between provisional and emergency licenses. Last school year, it ended up being 795. So we've really seen a doubling over the past several years.
Can I interrupt for a second?
Yes.
Just so everybody understands, could you just talk a little bit about the difference of what's a provisional license, what's an emergency
Absolutely.
license? And do these numbers include administrators, or is this just teachers?
Yeah, so it's all educator licenses, so it would include any admin license or even special ed, some like school psychologist, school nurse, stuff like that. We have a number of different endorsements. So a provisional license is a 2-year license with an option for a 3rd year for extenuating circumstances, which we are in. So there's a lot of 3rd year ones. And some of the qualifications are different. You need to have basically a bachelor's degree in the subject, pass the test, or be a teacher in a different area. So a math teacher who's now teaching science, or what we're seeing is a lot of teachers who are now working as special educators. We're also seeing a higher percentage of those provisionals being totally new people with no other license. It used to be about 50-50. The most recent data was actually 60% were totally new folks with no other license. So more people, and they're less experienced. Emergency licenses are 1 year, no opportunity for extensions. The requirements are a bachelor's degree, and the hiring district or SU needs to demonstrate what they've done to try to fill the position. So they have to show that they've had it posted multiple times, if they're doing a hiring bonus, stuff like that. Another trend is it used to be emergency licenses. We'd have maybe a dozen each year, and it was retired teachers who just had an expired license, so we put them on emergency. Now it's community members, it's family members who see a vacancy in their kids' schools. And so far this year, on that next slide, we've actually issued 108 emergency licenses. So the numbers I ran just before coming in, we have 527 provisional licenses that we've issued for this school year, 108 emergency licenses, and we currently have 76 pending applications. Some of them may not go anywhere, but so it's about 711 total. So a little bit less than last year, kind of looking at that graph, we'll see that like 22, 23, there's a bit of a plateau with a downturn. So I imagine once we have the end of the year, we'll see that again. It is a 2-year license. So the question is, what's that following year going to look like? We're hoping based off the numbers of the work that we're doing that it'll at least be a little bit stabilized and be a continued plateau for now. That second, technically slide 3, that's a breakdown of the top licenses in endorsement areas. So for provisionals, the most are special ed, elementary ed, school counselor, early childhood, and principal. And these are just what we've issued this school year. That's not including the folks who are still working on one that was issued last year. So special educator, I believe it's about 150 special educators currently working on a provisional license. It's kind of hard to get a good number on it. Another difference with emergency is no admin, special ed, or student services. So that's why you don't see special ed, school counselor, or principal on that list. But you can see a common trend there is elementary education. We just did our critical shortage report, and elementary education came on there for the first time. So what are we doing about it?
Before we jump on,
yes.
a couple questions here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I just wanted, I know we said that, about, we have 711 provisional emergency licenses. What's that out of, like, what's the total that we have? So what's the percentage of?
Well, total teachers?
Yeah, what's the percentage of the 711 out of the?
Yeah, I think it's around 7,000. I don't have the exact number of total teachers.
10%?
Yeah, so, and that's just that 711 is what we've issued this year.
This year.
So there's still
So there's
people from last year. And we've had a huge increase in that third year or additional 1 year request.
So follow up, you have a total on how many, the 711 plus what we had, what's the total?
Of people who are working, that one's harder to get. What I just saw, it was, I want to say it was like 800. So there are a lot of people who don't end up working both years. And another thing we see is actually sometimes 3 provisional licenses are the same classroom. So the person, they don't make it through the year. Someone new comes in, they don't make it through the year. So it's 3 different people in the classroom. That's another trend we've been seeing. Not sure on exact numbers. That's anecdotal.
Sorry, can I just ask, you're saying that in one classroom, 3 different people try and teach it and 3 different people.
Over the course of the year, yeah. So we're seeing a lot of there've always been mid-year quits, but we'll see like right around Thanksgiving, we get an increase in applications to fill vacancies that happened this time of year after break in January, and then in March, a smaller set. And that's a trend that's in other states as well. Yeah. So, and that's one of the challenges of temporary licenses is it's someone who hasn't had a preparation program. So they are less successful. Sometimes their administrator is also on a provisional license. So they may not feel totally able to support someone. The expectations of someone on a provisional license are the same expectations for a 30-year veteran. So a lot of that turnover that we're seeing are those very new people who don't have all that training. So that's where a lot of our focus has been. And when we get to the slide on the specific programs, you can see what folks are doing. But
I have a further
Yeah.
question, and you don't need to have the specifics right now, but does AOE have data on where all those provisional emergency licenses are being utilized, where they're teaching? I mean, anecdotally, we know we just came for lunch with superintendents and talking to a couple of them. Some of them have like 30% of their teachers.
yeah, yeah, I could get some. We have different ways of data
Yeah,
collection,
yeah.
and sometimes it looks a little bit different between the two, but like in general, it'll be some of the areas you would expect. We know, Chittenden County and some of the other districts, the way administrators will say is we were able to start the school year without vacancies. where other districts can't say the same thing.
If there is any of that kind of breakdown that you can provide as a
Yeah.
follow-up, I think some of us would
Yeah.
be interested in seeing it.
For sure,
Thank you.
that's been something I've really wanted to try to get a good solid answer that we
Yeah.
feel confident sharing, but we can, I can pull that together some stuff that we can share. So one of the first things we did after the Emerging Pathways grant, we really needed to expand our capacity. So we partnered with the Department of Labor and applied for a federal grant. So that's the State Apprenticeship Expansion Formula. And we were able to get a new position on our team. So our Emerging Pathways Coordinator, Amelia Wurzberg, she's awesome, from St. Johnsbury, former humanities teacher. So she's really been able to drive a lot of this, provide direct support to John's team as well as the other grantees. And then we're continuing that partnership. We're looking at some of the additional competitive grant opportunities. That's a conversation we're having right now. As you can anticipate, things are weird with some of those federal grants this week. So in addition to the Emerging Pathways, I did want to highlight too that the part of that bill was the 30,000, what we're calling the Affinity Group program. So those funds were awarded to the Education Justice Coalition to provide staffing for the Vermont Educators of Color Association. Some good numbers there, 100 members. They've developed partnerships with 10 districts and schools. They're having weekend-long retreats for members and their families. So that's what part of the funding is. But most exciting for me is they have the folks on their staff have this experience of looking into that idea of retention, right? And I think that's one thing that we don't want to shift focus away from recruitment, but I think we're really starting to think about that idea of retention a lot more. We really need to. So they're working on a Why We Stay research project. It's focused on Vermont educators of color, but a lot of what we see in some of the national research is there's very similar trends that we see, especially when we talk about other marginalized groups, rural communities, et cetera. So really excited for that project, and I'm sure they'll be here in front of you at some point. They usually are. So as far as the Emerging Pathways grant, we had 6 applicants, and the total requests was, I want to say it was like 630. So we went back and forth and we just decided like all of the applicants have really good ideas. So we gave them, it was about 80% of their requests. We just went forward with all of them. You can see a breakdown. By and large, a common theme is supporting people on provisional licenses. And when we look nationally, what other states are doing is that first low hanging fruit is those people who are in the classrooms now, they have a bachelor's degree. You can have some sort of one-year alternative program to really get them that license so they can be retained, right? So this is the idea of that retainment coming in of how can we stop that cycle of those provisional licenses expiring and someone new? How can we get someone who the district is really happy with to get them the supports to be successful? And in some cases too, thinking about how we can have those continued supports so we can think about their growth throughout their career over a few years as well. And so really changing that dynamic in thinking. But at the same time, we need to start thinking about some of those next pieces. There's a lot of para-educators who need to who don't yet have a bachelor's degree. They want to get a bachelor's degree. They want to get a license. So some of the groups are doing some of the research on that. We're starting to have some conversations. I'll talk on the last slide of kind of what our vision on that is, as well as starting that really early recruitment with high school students. So many teachers you talk to, they decided they wanted to be a teacher when they were in high school. That was true for me, true for most of my colleagues. So how can we make sure that we can capture them, give them those opportunities, send high schoolers into the elementary school, and have that experience count, get those practicum hours, get some of that early college, stuff like that, so that way they can transition into a program. And then another thing that you did was, the waiver of the $1,200 peer review fee. I'll be honest, a lot of us, we kind of like gulped when we first heard about it, because we've had a huge interest, and it's been really, really great. And one thing I wanted to highlight is it's caused us to be really innovative. You can see on that slide 7, last fiscal year, we almost doubled the amount of people who went through that program. We'd usually have around 70 or 80 people per year. We had 140 last fiscal year, and this fiscal year we've had 80 already. So we've had to really innovate our processes to make sure we can efficiently go through that, but we've really been very careful not to lower quality on that. So I had a couple, so this next slide, one of the biggest hurdles to this was that for the peer review program, every single person going through it, we schedule an interview for them to meet with 2 licensed teachers who've reviewed everything, and more often than not, when that meeting starts, you say, hey, so what questions do you have for the candidate? Say, none, they're great, I'm gonna recommend. So we decided to make the interview optional. And so the wait time for individuals went from, on average, 3 to 4 months down to 1 to 2 months. So that's one of the biggest reasons why we've been able to process so many earlier. And then the slide 9 and 10, if folks want to look at that, the summary is that what we found was that when we had that live interview, the person was nervous, they didn't have any other resources, so we'd ask a question and they would like come up with an answer that was good enough. But what we've started doing is more of an asynchronous. We send them the questions and say, these are the questions that your panelists have. Can you provide additional evidence and writing? And so it's given us a much higher confidence in those candidates and what they've been able to produce. So that's where we've seen not just this increase in quantity, but that increase in quality from those applicants. And then anecdotally, this change has made it so we've been able to recruit panelists. So panelists are working teachers. And one of the reasons why we had so many challenges last year is there's a teacher shortage, right? So we were down to 40 individual teachers supporting that program as panelists. With those changes and the hard work of our current coordinator, Michelle, we've been able to get to 200 panelist teachers who've been able to help. So that's been phenomenal. And also our business office helped us make some changes to our contracting process.
Can you remind me when the fee was reinstated?
It was
Or how long was it?
5 years, so I think 2029 is what I want to say. So yeah, it really did lead to a lot of innovation in that program. We're continuing to innovate. I didn't put up everything in here, but we've been using it a lot, working with mostly with principals and special ed directors who have really good candidates. One thing that when I was the peer review coordinator, right, in early COVID, I saw this trend of folks on provisional licenses trying to go through, doing all the right things. Right around that winter of year 2, that reach out and just say, I can spend time on meeting the needs of my students, or I can spend time on this thing for licensure.
Yep.
And even if that means I can't come back next year, I need to meet my students' needs right now. And I can't even tell you how many people I had that conversation with. So I've been working with a lot of administrators who have those folks who kind of like on paper, you can tell they have this amazing experience, they have the qualifications, they're just not checking the boxes. So how can we, using examples from New Hampshire and this idea of that's the New Hampshire site-based licensing plan. We've been working with that team, as well as that philosophy of apprenticeship. So how can we use that experience of as they're working, having their administrators, having a mentor teacher, really observe and sign off on them meeting those standards. And it's a very small number we've been doing that. But this flexibility between all of you and between our standards board has been really helpful for that. Then the final slide in here is kind of what our vision for the next couple of years is what we're hoping to create. And a lot of this already exists, which I always try to think of it. We don't need to like reinvent all the infrastructure. How can we use the existing infrastructure to just create more alignment and really support folks? So if we think about the teaching profession as a highway, there's a lot of off ramps. So we're trying to create more on ramps onto it. So as we think about one of the biggest resources in our schools are para educators. And there are not very many pathways for them to get a bachelor's degree and a teaching license while working full time. And a lot of times they have second jobs, so they can't work nights or weekends. So we've been working with our higher ed partners to think about ways that we can take examples from other states to develop this pathway. And then from there, how can we then reach out to those high school students, CTE students, and get them fed into that type of program as well. So that's kind of like our next, the next item that we're talking with higher ed and with folks all across the state. And maybe next time I'm in here, we can get some actionable parts from that plan.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Do you track likely retirements or what our turnover is going to be coming over the next 5 years?
Yeah, I need to do a better job of really engaging with the retirement folks. Every now and again, I'll send an email, but I have not been able to get that. It's something I really would like to have so I can make some of those predictions. It's a good reminder to I just don't know who the right person to email is, basically. So if anyone knows, email me.
Any other questions on this portion? Thank you. Really helpful. Good reminder to us to follow up on the legislation that we pass and see implementation through, and really appreciate that, the way that perhaps some forced innovation though has helped make it perhaps a little bit more streamlined and viable option.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We've
Thank
been
you.
happy.
Always open to ideas of how we can help.
Absolutely. Thank you. Great. And so then a focus on one of the projects.
Yes.
Well, thanks for having me, folks. I appreciate it. Just to maybe step back a little bit, give you some context. When I was a superintendent of schools at North Country, we were often competing with Kingdom East for having the most provisional emergency licenses. And then superintendent there, Jen Botziger, and we would sort of say, you know, we're up to 45, we're up to 50. And there were some years I think we surpassed 60. And Andrew can probably attest to that. So I know very well that the challenges of many of our school districts, but certainly in our most rural communities, are real for hiring our teachers. And I think it's beyond what we've traditionally thought. You know, school librarians, sometimes guidance counselors, math and science teachers, you know, middle school, high school, but it really is pretty pervasive at this point. So even schools are struggling with hiring elementary teachers. So I say that to make sure that we understand that there's a real need, but the other side of that is we have wonderful schools out there with amazing teachers doing amazing work, and even people that are coming to the profession in non-traditional ways are sometimes just blow our mind how ready they are to dive in and learn to be an educator. And some have a natural knack, some don't, and some have some challenges, and that's why we sometimes see this churn, as Andrew indicated. Sometimes we would have a middle school position open 1 year, and then that person would be on a provisional license. They might last a year, and then they would be gone. And then we'd have to try that process all over again. Currently, right now, in the Brighton Elementary School, they have North Country Supervisory Union instructional coaches in math and science going out to the school to provide math and science instruction because the individuals they hired didn't work out. And so it becomes very difficult to hire mid-year. And so school districts figure it out. But those are individuals that really should be supporting their colleagues in the field that are learning to be math and science teachers. So it's not always just the impact of those individual classrooms. Sometimes the impact is residual, right, within a school and even a supervisory. So I certainly want to illustrate that the needs are there. And even though we're now, 4 years, 5 years from the pandemic, it's not only about the pandemic, right? These are sort of national trends and shifts in people pursuing careers in education. I know Andrew had also provided some data around traditional educational prep programs. I've seen a decline. we really see the entire ecosystem of educator workforce development is something that needs to be addressed. So when we started this process, I reached out to then Secretary Dan French. That was the fall of 2022. He said, been thinking about this, we need a third party to help, move some of this forward. And we started some discussions, and thankfully we were provided a grant for VREC to do this work. That grant didn't officially get signed off on until last September, not this fall, but September of 2023. So that's when we formally began. We added some capacity to do some of this work and immediately started that partnership, working directly with Andrew and others at the agency, but also the Department of Labor. The third partner in that has been Vermont NEA. They have been wonderful to work with, and their place in the initial work that we've done is they're providing what's referred to as supplemental instruction for our apprentices currently. And so they've been, right from the very beginning, an integral part of that. And I really want to highlight the importance of that partnership, because I don't think any one of these, individual agencies or organizations could do it alone. I think the fact that we are a direct conduit to the field, and I'm able to communicate directly with superintendents and HR coordinators and knew firsthand the needs, I think that has helped some of the initial work. So when we embarked, I did a lot of research looking at national models and tried to figure out what would fit in a Vermont context, and realized that we needed to look at a multi-pronged attack. So we looked at, first and foremost, this idea of a para pathway, sometimes referred to as an earn and learn pathway, because that's what we were hearing from our superintendents. They have a lot of very promising para educators in their schools that don't have a pathway to get a bachelor's, but would make wonderful teachers. But even when they are finding non-traditional pathways, they often have to leave their employment to student teach. So in a true apprenticeship program, they're able to get experience in their job, maintain their employment, their benefits, and all of those things. So that was our first approach, partly based on the needs of our region, but also based on some of the national models, what was being successful, and actually discouraging registered apprenticeship programs being for teachers of record. The problem is we couldn't identify a higher ed partner. So at that point, Vermont State University just really wasn't a place to really engage in that work. UVM didn't seem interested, and the private colleges just they didn't have the capacity to turn around a new non-traditional program. We did explore some other national organizations like Western Governors University and never really got the traction. So I'm pleased. I think we've seen more interest from VTSU, and I think that's very promising. So we put that on hold, and we shifted our focus to those teachers that are the same teachers that Andrew was talking about that are going through peer review. And so the registered apprenticeship program started this fall with 28 individuals with 7 supervisory unions or supervisory districts in the Northeast Kingdom. We've lost a couple of people for a variety of reasons, but we're at 26 with 6 of our SUs and SDs. And I think we've had a very successful pilot. And again, that very synergistic work with the Department of Labor. They've been very good about the whole process of becoming a registered apprenticeship program. But really, it's Andrew and Amelia have been a great resource to work with, and certainly our individual school districts. So these are individuals that are able to currently essentially piggyback the peer review process. So they're technically getting their license through peer review, but they don't have to complete the peer review portfolio like other individuals, because their competencies are going to be signed off by their building administrator. So it's a bit of a hybrid until such time we review it again with the state standards board, and it sort of, it evolves and I think it proves itself. But I think that's been a very successful model. I think the goal is certainly to go larger. So it's not only in the Northeast Kingdom. I'm again very pleased that hopefully, even potentially, that we would launch an earn and learn para pathway by next fall. I think that's aspirational and ambitious, but it's not out of the question. And I think that's a real promising pathway. The third area that we're working on, and again, this is thanks to the Emerging Pathways grant. Again, I have this sort of appreciation yet frustration working with the agency, as Andrew knows. It took a long time to get that first grant, and felt like we missed almost a year of time. Unfortunately, the same thing happened with the Emerging Pathways Fund that was appropriated 2 sessions ago. Those RFPs went out in March or April of this past year. Grants were awarded in May to be expended by June 30th, which just wasn't going to happen. Then things got caught in carry forward, right? So it's just all the bureaucracy of all of that. So we didn't get a formal award until October. So it was impossible for us to be able to move fast enough with the hope to create a residency program by this coming fall. So we're now looking at the fall of 2026. So Andrew mentioned before that we're really starting to look at things like retention. And that's one of, I think, the biggest issues that I think is underappreciated. So even in the provisional license mode and emergency license, you got to fill positions, you do everything you can, but we're seeing too many times that that's not successful. A residency program, the data behind that nationally are some of the most successful around retention, where individuals have this long runway to get up to speed. So a resident would work embedded in a school with a master teacher for an entire year. And we even learned about a program in New York State that's 2 years, which is a very large investment. But even that investment for a year, somebody would be employed, they're receiving benefits, they're getting a master's degree potentially paid for, depending if it's an MA program or a BA program, and they're getting all of that experience. Whereas even in a traditional educational prep program, which we certainly value, is typically 9 to 12 weeks of student teaching, which really isn't enough for the success of a young teacher. So a residency model, we're again very thankful that we have the grant from the agency to work on that. We're working with an organization nationally called the National Center for Teacher Residencies. And I think Andrew will also attest that some of these national organizations that have capacity that support some of this work, they're able to demonstrate other models and show models and provide a scaffolding. So the 4 institutions of higher ed that have expressed interest are UVM, Champlain College, the Vermont Higher Ed Collaborative, and the Vermont Math Initiative are all interested in potentially pursuing a residency model. And so we are just beginning that work with those higher ed partners. We'll explore that. At some point, hopefully one of them or more than one of them will take the ball and run with it and look to develop a residency model. It would probably not be exclusive to the Northeast Kingdom. I think it would be something that would be statewide, which is something I embrace. But I think that's very promising. The last thing I wanted to share with you as part of the work that we've done is we've created a cohort of teachers and administrators in the Northeast Kingdom from high schools and career and technical centers that we call NEK Next Gen Teachers. So these are individuals that are trying to promote careers in education with secondary students, so that we start right at that level, encouraging them to get work-based learning experiences, things like after-school programs, summer programs, helping them learn about educational prep programs, whether that's UVM or St. Michael's or Johnson, and so creating that next generation and creating an enthusiasm around the careers in education is something we feel we need to plant those seeds early. So I guess our approach has been all of those. I don't think any one of them is sort of the magic. I think they're all important to growing a workforce for the future that has high quality and I think high levels of retention. And we appreciate that partnership that we have. I enjoy working so much with Andrew. I certainly encourage that your 2 bodies will consider, along with those folks making decisions around the finances, the forgivable loan program, which I know you will hear about shortly, is something that we very much support and believe that that's part of the success of a new generation of teachers. But that those emerging pathways grants, I think there's still much more potential to support things like a residency program and other alternative pathways that we've yet to sort of scratch the surface. And I think we can't look at these things as one-time appropriations. I think they need to be ongoing investments. And I would also just suggest that an investment in the continued capacity of the agency. So since Amelia's been involved, she's essentially taken the ball from the work that I was doing and going threefold, because that's her focus, where I was running other things for the organization that I do. And I think, having that ability to grow alternative pathways for licensure and promote the careers and education with somebody dedicated to that in the agency is really valuable. So hopefully there's a way to figure out to sustain that. So, there you go.
Thank you. So I'm new to education. So I'll try to go into the lane that I'm familiar with. Everything I look at, I view as a housing problem. And I can't talk to a single employer without it coming back to a housing problem. I wonder if the person who's doing the pathways work or anybody in your sphere is looking at the number of teachers who are dissatisfied with their housing or cost burden by their housing. I personally think that any campuses that might no longer be used for education in the future would be a great place to look at housing, and particular teacher housing. So I can't talk to an employer without saying, I hope you're thinking about housing and actually at the table on that topic.
Yeah, I can start. Absolutely. I mean, we have a large number of teachers from out of state who come to Vermont, and we hear every year from principals who they've secured a very qualified teacher, years of experience, they have the contract, and then a couple weeks before school, they couldn't find a house. And so then they scramble to get someone on a provisional. So that's definitely a component. What's within my capacity and my levers that I can pull is that's one of the reasons why we want to support leaders and other community members who already have a house, live within walking distance of their schools at times. So and that's another way that you can retain someone. Another piece we didn't talk about is that so many times a lot of districts, they hire a new teacher, recent graduate, invest in them for a few years, and then they'll leave. They'll move back to Chittenden County or find a district for sometimes out of state with higher pay. So that's where that focus of really how we can grow our own farming communities who have the homes, who oftentimes have family members who are students, and being able to build relationships with students when you have that connection as well. But absolutely, I mean, that we hear from superintendents all the time about how housing issues really affect their hire.
I would just say absolutely. It's definitely a major concern. And I think, and I'm a member of the Commission on the Future of Public Education, along with Peter and certainly many others. And so I think when we think about some of the solutions, it's more than just education, right? We need to be looking at all of those things. And I think, housing is definitely a key component. And it's not only teachers. I think it's an impact on all staff, right? So there's challenges of hiring paraeducators and hiring bus drivers and other, custodians. I even had situations where we had principal candidates from out of state that said, very interested in this job, but I looked at your regional housing market and can't believe what the costs are if they're coming from, some other rural area in Minnesota or Wisconsin or something, and just say, I can't make the change, right? What I'm currently making is with the housing cost is something more than what I would make there. So I think it's definitely access, but also cost.
Other questions?
Just to clarify, the emerging pathways and the loan forgiveness, these were all one-time appropriations, right?
Correct.
They are not ongoing appropriations.
Yeah, and appreciate it. So I would just encourage to look at them again and consider them again, given the needs are not going away. And I think, some of this becomes an inducement or access for higher ed, right? So that they have some capacity to build out programs. That's one of the things that we've been hearing. Certainly, this whole discovery around a residency model, we received about $75,000 to support this initiative, and that's really great. But probably you're going to run out of money, and hopefully higher ed partners will be able to take the ball and run with it. And, Amelia and Andrew can kind of keep things moving, but it's surprising very small investments, and when you think about the whole scheme of things, that I think can make a major difference in that teacher workforce.
All right,
Great.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Another part of that package was forgivable loans for teachers, so we're gonna get a little bit of detail on that as well, with a check back on our work and considerations for future investments. You might introduce yourself and
Sure.
thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. My name is Scott Giles. I'm the president and CEO of the Vermont Student Assistance Corporation. And it's a pleasure to see some new faces and some familiar faces in different seats. So that's all wonderful. My testimony will be fairly brief, largely just a report back on the initiative that we worked with this committee on in FY '24. It's hard to believe that it was booked that long ago and that quick in many ways. And for, context, I don't think I need to tell the combined committee about the nature or the magnitude of the challenge that we face with regard to our educator workforce. At this point, it's a statewide challenge that, as John and Andrew, indicated, is particularly experienced in our rural communities. And that means everywhere here in Vermont, because we are the most rural state, in the country. And my observation, having worked in this area a little bit and in other workforce areas, is that there's no one magic bullet to addressing a situation like that. It requires multiple approaches, collaboration, and a lot of creativity. I think some of that creativity you've heard beforehand. So I'll just talk a little bit about the program that we worked on together. This program, the Teacher Forgivable Loan Program, we call it a forgivable loan program because that's the structure of it. But another way to think about this is as a scholarship with a work requirement on the back end. And that work requirement is that an individual who receives a scholarship under this program is obligated to work in Vermont for a year as a teacher for each year that they received a scholarship. We are now 2 years into this program, so we have relatively few people that have moved into the workforce, but this coming year, we'll start to see those numbers begin to change, and we look forward to kind of reporting back on what those numbers look like. Before I jump into the demand for the program, I shared some of this in the slides that you've already seen. I do want to offer some context. This last year was a rather crazy year for those of us in the higher education space. If you had reason to be active in this space, you know that the federal government completely botched its rollout of the core federal financial aid application that is the foundation for all student financial aid delivery. In an application that was supposed to be delivered or available in October, was not available for families until really this past May. Nationwide, that resulted in some fairly substantial initial declines in students pursuing post-secondary education. And we spent a good part of our time this past year trying to play catch up with that. In May of this past year, when they opened, we were about 7,500 student applications behind. We got almost 7,000 of those done between May and September. And I offer that up because this program, of course, is being offered in that context. And the numbers that I am going to share with you, I think, understate the demand that has built up for the program in the 2 years since we started. I did have the opportunity to report back on this program. In that first year, like all new programs, it was a slow start. We were educating people regarding the availability of the program and what it could offer. And through that process, we engaged both the Vermont NEA, we worked with the Vermont Principals Association, but more importantly, we leveraged our relationships with the higher education community very directly, and we're able to engage the leaders of all the education programs in the state. And the result of that was pretty dramatic in terms of participation in the program. And what I would like to report out, it's on, I think, page 3 of the slides that we shared with you. In the first year, we had 74 individuals that we awarded. This past year, and I should comment that we received $2.5 million worth of from one-time sources with the authority to carry it forward so that we could continue to make awards. That first year, we made the 74 awards. This last year, we spent all of the money, having made 166 awards. And there were nearly 200 applicants that we were unable to fund as a result of this. And I want to echo something that I've heard from your earlier testimony. As you know, VSAC has outreach counselors working in most of the middle schools and high schools, and we have many students who are interested in pursuing careers in education, but are also anxious about the cost benefit, kind of relationship between an investment in higher education and what they're able to earn, on the back end. And as a result, we've oftentimes through the years seen students who really wanted to pursue education, but were nervous about whether or not they would earn enough once they became educators in order to be able to make that investment worthwhile. One of the really powerful things about this program is that it answers that question very dramatically for them. And I think one of the unforeseen benefits of this that we are seeing in the applicant pool and that we will see over time is that this also economically diversifies the students that are interested in pursuing careers in education, which I think is really valuable for us as a community, long term. So, with that, I'll make one final observation, and that is that this program, we now have recipients from every county in the state but one. We're working on Essex County, if anyone wants to help me there. But the reason that that's important, we talked about the challenges getting individuals to commit to rural locations. The one thing that we are excited about with this program is that we are seeing students from every one of these communities participate in this program because they want to become educators. And we have every reason to believe that they want to become educators because of the experiences they had in their own schools and the impact that that had on their own communities, and that their interest in becoming educators will actually translate into their desire to go back into their communities and serve in the same way that they were served. So with that, I will stop and just thank the committee for the support that you provided for the leadership, and know that we will be coming hopefully later to both committees with a very specific budget request for this program and others.
Is it possible to get in a future date some of that data about the students, some of the demographics and things of who availed themselves of this, and to see if it met some of our hopes, at least, for expanding access to the teacher
Absolutely.
workforce? And then are those numbers, FY24, FY25 awards, are those different students, 74 plus 166, or is it possible that a student got it 2 years?
Yeah, so 20% of those awards are returning students
Okay.
coming back in who will then have multiple years of obligation
Okay.
in Vermont. 80% of them are new awards.
So roughly 200-ish
Mhm.
individual.
Yeah.
New teachers.
And the missing 200 that didn't get awards, all would qualify for them.
Yes, we have not run all of those numbers. Once we have the cutoff, we don't run their full age calculation to determine what they would have been eligible for. But I would conservatively say 150 of them, based on what we've seen before, would have been eligible if we had resources.
And we also, I assume, don't have data that says, but for this program, did they leave, did they stay?
We don't have that yet. What we do have is anecdotal information. This program is, now that this program is 2 years in, we are starting to hear stories from the students themselves. Who had questions about whether the program will continue and, what this could mean for them. What I will just kind of share again, it's an anecdote. I was talking with one of our outreach counselors yesterday, who has got a student who is very seriously interested in pursuing education, and this scholarship would be the thing that would make the difference for her in her ability to attend an institution and much less pursue a career in education.
Other questions? All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
And we have one more witness this afternoon before we have to be on the floor at 3, so we'll try to wrap that at 2:50. Is that? Yeah.
We, at this round, but we don't have any schedules.
I can utilize as much time as or committees.
All right, so as long as we are talking teacher workforce, a little bit more insight, and also I know, Colin, the NEA has worked with all of these different programs and pathways and ways to try to bolster our teacher pipeline and support teacher retention. So appreciate your time today.
Great. For the record, Colin Robinson, Vermont NEA. Good to see many of you again. This is my first time in front of both of your committees. And I apologize, I was previously booked, so I didn't have the luxury of hearing all of the previous conversation, but I did connect with my colleagues who came before me, so I understand the general contours of what they are speaking to. So I will attempt not to be repetitive, but apologies in advance if I touch on something that they may have already touched on. I wanted to start by providing a little bit of context. You know, Vermont NEA, we're the union that represents, we have about 12,000 members, public school educators, teachers, and school support staff. And I think your committees generally understand that issues impacting the pipeline and the teacher and educator workforce predate the pandemic. I think we all know that the reasons of the pandemic exacerbated those, and that's why the House and Senate Education Committee did such important, impactful work, as we've already heard, in the past several years to address some of these acute challenges. I do want to acknowledge, though, that we are still hearing from our members about the immense and critical social emotional needs students have, how that impacts their ability to access their learning, and how that impacts educators' ability to do their jobs and meet their needs. Burnout continues to be high. Ability to attract and retain folks continues to be high. I imagine Andrew may have spoken to this, but 50% of teachers leave after the first 5 years, and that number continues. I was talking with some members earlier this week who, just so folks are aware, our back of the envelope calculation is somewhere between 300 and 400 positions are being eliminated across the state right now. And as districts have been going through those reductions, early career educators are saying, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to continue in this. And so I just wanted to contextualize the highly important and impactful work that has been done and that the legislature's led on and that we have engaged in with our partners at the AOE and VREC and VSAC, that it's still really difficult. And overlay that with the conversation that you are embarking on coming out of yesterday that could have seismic impacts. Two other things that I just want to highlight as it relates to, I'm not sure the role of public policy on this, meaning the role of the legislature, but there continues to be a significant limited number of substitute teachers. And so that results in teachers and school support staff and principals and administrators triaging every day in the best way possible to have adults supporting students in the ways they can. However, it is and continues to be acute. So what I wanted to lift up in that context is that we have been doing really good work. And you heard from Andrew and John and Scott earlier. One of the first kind of leading edge program was a program that Vermont NEA stood up, actually with the help of Senate Ed at that point in the throes of the pandemic, to draw down some ARP ESSER funds to basically throw gas on what was a burning ember, something called Grow VT Ed. And what we are seeing, you heard Andrew speak to this, is that at its peak, we had over 1,200 educators on emergency and provisional licenses. And it was clear that these folks were coming in, many of them trying to do their best, but needed critical supports to not only meet the needs of their students in their classroom, but if they wanted to make a long-term career of this, actually attain permanent licensure. And the AOE has and continues to have their peer review process. But for educators who are teaching full-time, who maybe didn't come with an education background or changing careers, that can be a really daunting process. And so my colleague, Dr. Juliet Longchamp, who is a 30-year educator at Wilson Central School, worked with the AOE and stood up a program to provide robust peer mentorship and scaffolding to shepherd folks through the peer review process. And we've continued that over the past several years. And to date, we've had 88 folks sort of matriculate through that program. And we still have over 100 folks in process. And so those folks are going through cohort support, receiving mentorship, and really helping to ensure that when their provisional emergency license ends, that they have submitted their portfolio to receive permanent licensure, to begin their career, to be able to continue to provide the education to their students. So this has been a really phenomenal success. And it was sort of again, it was kind of this crisis moment. And we worked with, again, then Senator Campion, Chair of Education, say, okay, let's do this. Came back, worked with your committees in the subsequent session to get additional funding. And here we are. That funding is going to be ending. However, we're going to continue to run the program. Julie's going to continue to support educators through the peer review process. And to that end, though, she has been working really closely with VREC, AOE, and DOL on the teacher apprenticeship program. And she really does see that as the next phase of this, because trying to become an educator while teaching is really difficult. And the mentorship and supports are more robust in the apprenticeship program. And so that's a really, really exciting that's been able to launch this year. And then, as you just heard from Scott, I remember working with Representative Brady and other members of House Education coming in. I was looking at my testimony from 2003 saying, we need to do a teacher student loan forgiveness program like was done for nurses, because this was modeled after a program that BSAC had done for nurses. And we were like, we think there's going to be interest in this. We hope there's going to be interest. There should be interest because there's important need here. And the work was done to pass it. And obviously Scott just spoke to the immediate, strong, and visceral response. And so going forward, I would say as the committees that are focused on making sure our students have the resources they need to receive the education that they deserve, and that their educators, including teachers and others and support staff, have the resources, recognizing that the support there's a lot that you can do to help on the pipeline. However, and there's been a lot of good work there. I think going forward, making sure that things like working conditions and compensation are addressed. Quite frankly, I'll talk about school construction. I think is an area where when students are learning and educators are teaching in buildings that haven't been able to be maintained in the way that they're needed, that has an impact. And so we see things like that as really critical to making sure that we're able to attract and retain high quality educators now and into the future. So I'll pause those. I have some prepared materials that unfortunately I didn't get to Annie in time. I do have written, I printed out copies that folks are interested in paper, but I will send those to Annie so she can post, and I'm happy to answer questions as well. I do have one final thought.
Oh, yeah.
School support staff. Those have been one of the biggest vacancies that have been incredibly difficult to fill. And I think oftentimes folks think of paraeducators, behavioral interventionists, again, Representative Taylor, as somehow extra, but they are critical essential to allowing and supporting students to access their learning and teachers' ability to provide education. And the fact that those vacancies have been so difficult to fill, it just creates stresses for everybody. And, you know, I think school boards and quite frankly, our members through a negotiations process have been trying to address some market factors, you know, where you can go to a national chain and receive higher compensation and not have to deal with some pretty significant challenges that those frontline workers are dealing with. But I just wanted to acknowledge that that continues to be a very, very clear area that needs some additional attention. And so to that end, one thing that we've been having some conversations with legislators about that I don't think would fall into the purview of the education committee is actually on unemployment insurance. School support staff are one of the few, and I want to say only, but I'm going to say one of the few just because I don't want to box myself in, groups of workers that are categorically ineligible from even applying for unemployment insurance. And on a basic workforce retention matter, you know, these are folks who often end up having to work second jobs just to make ends meet. But if you're in a situation where you find a better gig in the summer months, you're not going to come back in the next school year. And that is going to impact the student you worked with that past year. That's going to impact and create a challenge for the school to hire your replacement. And so if we can have things to mitigate and hopefully support folks to sustain their connection to and hopefully employment with a school in these critical positions, something as simple as allowing them to actually apply. It doesn't guarantee, but they can't even categorically apply right now. So again, there's no panacea here, but I did want to just put a little special extra emphasis on that issue as well.
Thank you.
It's in the bill that I'm working on in the labor.
Yes. Thank you, Stephanie.
I just want to clarify, everything we talked about now was the result of our ESSER funds, right? This has all been one time, we were flush. We were able to put some money towards these programs to see if they worked. Kind of seems like they worked. And now we have to make some hard decisions about potential future funding.
I also
Right.
just note as a comment, right, thinking about this too, whether it's the teacher loan forgivable program or, you know, nurse forgivable loan program, we, as a state, don't invest at a robust level in higher education by any stretch of the imagination, and I'm sure we'll get into that when we look at budget requests, but barring a significant policy change in that direction, which I would advocate for, you know, another way in which we can support our institutions of higher education in Vermont are some of these other ways that we directly impact students who are accessing those institutions. I don't think it should replace perhaps a more significant investment in higher education writ large, but I do think that there's some benefit for us to think about as in our political lens.
And I recognize that this, again, isn't in the totality of the scope, perhaps, of your committees. But I'd be remiss to not acknowledge things like housing has impacts, not only on the students and their own housing status, but I'm sure if you had the superintendents or principals association sitting here, they would talk about any number of offers that were made to educators who wanted to actually come from other states for various reasons.
We got a full dose of it before you.
Okay. Great, okay. Okay, good. I did have the catch-all caveat at the beginning that I might repeat something, so.
No, I think it's like
Well,
Ron
worth
Hinsdale
repeating.
pointed out, there's no discussion in Vermont that doesn't ultimately serve that housing.
Yeah, exactly.
Any other questions from either committee?
Thank you.
All right,
Thank you.
All right,
Thank you.
we'll wrap there.
Okay.
Committee will be off now.
Okay.
Get it forward.